My name is Rob Fry. I'm a CTO at AK Identity. Been in the industry for almost 30 years. Spent about 20 on the customer side working for interesting companies in the utility industry, media. Had a chance to work at Netflix for a little bit. I've been an identity consumer in my past. Implemented different types of identity products as well. About a year and a half ago, a friend of mine came to me and he was talking about the identity space, and I didn't know that much about it, probably not as much as many of you in the audience. Definitely not as many have probably implemented things like Active Directory and Entra and Okta and all these other types of things. And so I've been learning a whole bunch this last 2 years, but the problems were really familiar to me. So I am a self-described data nerd. I've built all sorts of really interesting products, interacted with lots of databases, did data engineering before it was actually a team. And as we were going out and talking to customers and listening to different types of identity problems, what was interesting to me was things that plagued a lot of enterprises when it came to identity were very familiar. These are things that to somebody in IT that's a security person or an identity expert might be something new. But the point of the presentation here today is to start to talk about how there are opportunities to make things better in the identity world, not by trying to create new technology, but just learning from your peers probably inside of your own company. So the first thing to kind of go through here is making sure we level set on what the workforce identity challenges are when it relates to identity. You're going to be pretty familiar with most of these, I think. I think the first one that I found kind of interesting, and I've seen companies like Gartner, Forrester, everybody has a maturity model. We created a maturity model as well. Understanding where you're at from an identity perspective, an identity maturity perspective is really important in order to understand essentially what you're missing as much as what you're actually doing. If you think of it from a scale of like 1 to 5, 1 being the least mature, 5 being the most mature, what you have inside of there essentially is what's your level of automation, what's your level of being able to aggregate data for compliance or policies, all sorts of sophisticated types of things that as you get closer to 5, you probably have a pretty good life, you probably have a pretty good budget, and you have a company that supports you. Of the 300 companies I've talked to in the last 2 years, I've only met 2 that were 5s. It's pretty rare to actually find a company that's willing to spend the money in order to solve a lot of the problems associated with identity and identity data. Next thing is going to be workforce identity, the complexity. I was sitting in New York a couple years ago talking to a financial, and I was just hearing all these acronyms. Started writing them down, right? I think probably by the end of the week, talking to other companies, I had, it was over 3 dozen identity acronyms. And it was weird to me. I'm going through and putting it into Google and trying to do a search and discover what all these different acronyms are. I hit about 24 and I just stopped and I looked at my co-founder and was just like, I pointed at him because he's a former VC. And to be honest, VC are part of the problem inside of identity because every time an analyst like Gartner creates a new acronym, the VCs fund it. And this is where you end up with 3 dozen, 4 dozen different acronyms. And so what this essentially entails from like a data perspective is you have so many different identity products in different formats, different locations, potentially depending on the size of the company, are probably different teams that own those things. And this is one of the larger problems that I've seen inside of identity. You don't know where it is, you don't know how to aggregate it, you got to create a ticket and send it to a different team. And then another thing that comes out of this obviously is the universal truth. Somebody find me a company that doesn't have over provisioning. If you can, like literally tell me because I've never met one. And then the last thing on this, and it leads into the next slide, which is the business drivers, right? So if you're a decent sized company, if you're a public company, sometimes if you're not a public company, you're going to be under regulation, you're going to be under compliance. identity is such a huge part of that, knowing who you are, what your title is, who you report into, what you have access to. From a business perspective, while they don't necessarily understand a lot of the technical mumbo jumbo that technical people try and use to explain the challenges from an identity perspective to a business person, what they do understand is security risks. They do understand when data gets compromised and exfiltrated. They do understand the challenges related to inefficiency. You know, the VP of marketing that starts on Monday, his account isn't fully provisioned just yet. And he's not able to do all of the work that he needs to do because of it. The inefficiency of the amount of money you're spending on licensing because of its expensive entitlements, even though there's people that probably aren't using it. This leads into the compliance burden, and then you know, there's also kind of the business enablement. That was the other thing that I thought was interesting in the identity space, is that the user experience for the end users, not for the identity and the IT people and the security people, but actually the employees. It's a very painful process for them as well, and it gets measured in productivity, gets measured in satisfaction, frustration, all these other different types of things that the business actually cares about. This one, as a data engineer, is very familiar to me. You're always worried about data quality, data changes. When something changes, it can have cascading ramifications throughout an entire product. As I went out and I talked to a bunch of identity professionals like yourselves, there was this essentially unknown quantity that they didn't know how to quantify for me around essentially the data. And the phrase that you see on there is, "I don't trust my data." And I found this to be really interesting. I just assumed that everybody knew what the source of truth was, and that these things were consistent. So whatever HR says, that's what's going to be inside of Intra or Okta or whatever kind of case may be. There's things like federation. What I've learned is that it's anything but. Apparently it's a big issue. And if you take a step back, how many people here probably have extended Active Directory, custom schema, have used a field in order to, you know, jam some additional values inside of there? Yeah, I got one hand out of that one. It's when you start to look at like how people use the tooling in order to be able to do their job, and then you start to think about you know, complexity as you bring this in. I've seen companies that have 5 forests with an average of 20 domains per forest. They also, through acquisitions, probably, I've seen ones have 8 different separate instances of Okta running. And inside of IT, as much as we have things like RPA, robotic process automation, other types of automation tools, federation tools, because of complexity, because of the dynamic nature of identity, this identity hygiene problem is an issue. And it's such a big issue. I mean, I was surprised. I'm even starting to hear Gartner talk about identity hygiene here recently. So even they're starting to catch on to this particular problem. And where this actually goes is to people having access that they don't need. People having access to software that's very expensive. People having access to compliance systems that shouldn't have access to compliance systems. All of these things because you have the wrong title. Because you went through a reorg and your information wasn't updated in one specific system. Or it hasn't updated yet because there's a ticketing process that's going to take 12 weeks, 8 weeks, 9 weeks, whatever kind of the case may be. And so I like to describe one of these as the FinApps, the FinOps problem. I saw a company, they hired a new VP of finance. And the application team that belonged to the finance team was called FinOps. And he was just like, I don't like that name. I want that team to be called FinApps. So he sits down with the heads of HR. They go through the HR system. They make sure everybody's updated. And then, not surprisingly, several weeks later or months later, it basically introduced a data hygiene issue because he wasn't aware, the HR team wasn't aware, and even a whole bunch of other people in the company aren't aware of how many things are keyed off of, are automated off of, or otherwise from that tag of FinOps. So data hygiene. So now let's change gears a little bit now that we have set the stage for challenges from the identity perspective. Let me talk a little bit about how the business views this, right? So having worked in production engineering environments for, public consumer companies and whatnot, data is everything to us. It's what allows us to understand what features customers are using, what customers are not. Quick story, when I was at Netflix, I don't know if you guys know this, when you go out to Netflix and you see all the cards, the little pictures from the TV show or the movie that you're looking at, pretty much every one of you gets a different one. And what we did with that was we wanted to see if we would actually go into a TV show or a movie, and based off of your viewing habits, the type of shows that you like to watch, associate that to things that were in any particular TV show or movie, take a shot of that and posted that on the card, would you actually click on it more? And it was wildly successful. And so if you think about that from a business perspective, we cared because if you got an extra interaction of 0.01% from users, that would equivalent to millions, potentially tens of millions of dollars. And so the big thing here is that businesses these days, especially if you're a cloud business or anything that's externally facing to like consumers, it's important to do all of this stuff. It's revenue, it's customer satisfaction, it's retention, it's all these different things that are the lifeblood of a company. So as you can imagine, we spend a lot of money on it when you're on that side of the house. It's nice to be close to revenue. I've talked to a lot of friends who are on the IT side. They don't nearly get as much budget. When you work close to revenue, you get a lot of budget. But let's go through kind of a side-by-side comparison, right? So if I say the business has similar problems, like what are some examples? So identity data issues are not new. I was actually kind of, and this isn't like a negative thing, but I remember talking to another customer, and I walked up to the whiteboard, and I was like, why don't you just do this? And they looked at me like I was kind of crazy. And what I knew is that these different systems that they were trying to integrate with either had LDAP, PC3280, an API, whatever kind of the case may be. Data was there, data was available. The ability to actually interact with the data and pull the information out for doing some of the use cases they were talking to me about was there. The challenge is they didn't know how to do it. Or they knew that the data was there, they wanted to leverage it, but they're inside of a company of 50,000 people. And so you go back to the complexity issue, the data hygiene issue. This is something on the business side that's done on a daily basis. If you have a data science team, a data engineering team, they want to merge the latest marketing thing that went out to the public with usage information, right? We call that cross-domain pollination. They want to know analytics on it, right? Well, in the identity world, you have usage information and you have what people have access to. It's cross-domain information. Another thing I learned inside of identity, hardly anybody uses and even accesses or pulls in or aggregates or correlates usage information. It's normal for us on the business side to do it. It literally is the thing that we're keying off of on so many things. But I don't see any products in industry leveraging the usage information that's usually readily available. So the business does these things. They do it for a business reason. They do it for an imperative to success. But they also do it in order to generate new data sets, right? So analytics. These days, pretty much every company has a data science team for the most part. Some are larger than others. You go back about 10 or 15 years, data science was something that was like academic, DoD. Not everybody had data science teams, but it's such a popular thing right now. Everybody wants to generate analytics that lead to all the things that I talked about previously. If I take a step back and I think about identity, there are a bunch of questions that you guys need answered. There are a bunch of questions There might even be questions you don't even know because you don't have the right analytics. And that goes back to data. The other thing is that once you start to generate analytics, on the business side, we can start to look at trends, right? All sorts of different examples for this one. I won't bore you with more business stories. But businesses have to be able to predict. And we do a lot of predictive analytics. You can take things like how people operate, what location they're at, what is their demographic, in order to do trending, in order to try and get ahead of where they need to be or what service that you need to provide or whatever kind of case may be. On the identity side, obviously it's different. The data sets are pretty similar. But if somebody hasn't used a piece of software for 2 years, and that piece of software costs $1,000 a license, why wouldn't you take that license away from them? If somebody is logging in from different locations, Superman, if you're a security person, type of detections, you know, obviously a lot of security people like to do stuff with that. It's a hard thing to do, but it's all done through analytics. You could think of things like profiling, baselining. You come into office one day, and then I keep track of what you're doing for the next 6 months, 12 months. That could be one of your baselines. What's normal, what's not normal. You might hear different products called anomalies or outliers. It's just really like, what does normal look like? What does normal not look like? All of these things are valuable to identity. You're starting to hear this inside the industry. I don't think I've heard identity analytics used so much as the last 6 months. You're starting to hear things around new technologies as well that I'll get to in a minute. But from the business side, these things are important because they are our insights. They are our measures of efficacy. They are the things that allow us to kind of predict where things are going. These are the same things I'm telling you that identity is trying to do or needs to do in the future. So then there's this usage thing. How many people leverage usage inside of their business right now when it comes to identity? Anybody? Whether it's like a SIM or anything like that? The chief architect from Paris. I'm glad that I got one hand raised. This one's been really weird for me that, for me it's just natural, right? Like if you want to be able to tell what's being used, what's not being used, if you want to be able to tell all sorts of different information, usage is a key to this. And it exists. That's the other thing, right? Like somebody told me one time, yeah, but it's an SQL database. And I was like, and there's a transaction log. And they were like, well, it's AWS. And I was like, I can't even tell you how many different logs there are in AWS that tell you what people are doing, right? So this data is available. I'm not saying that it's easy by any means. I've actually had to be able to do a trace from somebody who's logging in from Okta into AWS IAM and realizing that whatever unique identifier was on one side doesn't exist on the other side and having to do the translation between the two. So there are some difficulties with this. Coming from a data engineering perspective, these are things that we're used to doing. These are things that are possible. So let's talk about some of the techniques, the technologies that we've used on the data engineering side of the house before that I would tell you over the next, we'll say 6, 12, 18 months maybe. You're already starting to hear some of these things. And there's going to be one that I talk about. It's that number 7 there. It might annoy you, right? It might seem like identity data fabric. What's that? Sounds like a made-up term. Identity data fabric is actually an adopted term that came from the data engineering world. We have data meshes and we have data fabrics. And it essentially solves the same problem on the business side that Gartner, who I think is the one that coined the term identity data fabric, identity data fabric is solving the same problem on the identity side as it does on the business side. But you don't just have a fabric. A fabric is made up of things like a data pipeline. So that probably isn't an unfamiliar world or word to you. Data pipelines are everywhere these days. If you've ever heard of something like Kafka, or you've ever had data moved from your mainframe system into your Oracle system. These are all different types of data pipelines. They're valuable because you're essentially automating a task that might have had to been done manual entry in the past, and it helps to reduce manual errors, essentially. The next part is once you get access to it and you can put it through a data pipeline, you have to be able to understand it. So normalization, right? You have to be able to say, in one field it's S name, and in another database, in another field it's username. And you have to understand that those two are the same thing. You normalize them. So you're going to have Active Directory schemas where, I can't remember some of the ones off the top of my head, but there is like a user DN, there's CNs, there's all these different fields that mean something. In a different system, it might mean something completely different. Title, role, all these fields are valuable across all of these identity systems that you interact with every day. And the challenge that I've seen a lot of customers have is either they don't know how to normalize it or they just can't. Now, once you get the data and then you're able to normalize the data, what do? Well, I've already been talking about it. You should start generating analytics. Analytics will answer questions. How many people are using things on any one particular day? Do some role mining. How many people inside a particular department are using something? There's all sorts of different types of really great analytics. Not to talk bad about other products out there, but I remember looking at a very popular, I think it's #1 inside of its space, a webinar. And their idea of analytics was to go inside the product, export it to a CSV, and then load it up inside of Excel. That's not analytics. Might be a pivot table if you know how to do that, but analytics needs to be much more sophisticated. It needs to actually be generated to answer a question that you have. If you can do analytics, then you can get more sophisticated, do more math, and now you can get to what I was talking about earlier, which was cross-domain correlation. This is a hard thing. Normalizing two data sets into essentially like a single data set and understanding the relationships across the different data sets and then being able to correlate across them is exactly what, if you're a customer out here of an identity product, that's exactly what you want to do. And it's the exact thing that's probably hurting you, or you don't have access to that system and you need to put the ticket in and wait for the other team that owns that system to get back to you to give you the answer. All these different types of challenges. But once you have the analytics and once you have the correlation, what does everybody want to do? They want to automate things, right? We've had 10 years of SOAR and robotic process automation and all sorts of other different things. I'm sure probably people in this room have implemented them. If you're not, you should, but they actually help out a lot. But when you're able to get the data, you're able to ask it a question, you're able to get some answer back, obviously you're going to find things that are wrong. And that's going to lead you to hopefully wanting to automate as many things as possible. I saw one customer, guy that worked in a security department. He was promoted to this now new term, this new role, this new team inside enterprises called the IAM team. And he spent 3 months going soup to nuts on documenting everything about identity inside the corporation and what the processes are, and he had it on his Confluence page. He was pretty proud of himself. And then 3 months later, everything on that page for the most part was antiquated, because identity is dynamic, right? And so this is where automation can help with those types of things as well. I've already gone into data hygiene enough. I've already kind of talked about the data fabric. Remember these terms. Remember these terms. Remember the capabilities. Remember to talk about these things in the future. These are things that can help you from an identity perspective. So now let's move on to, let's talk about modernization of identity data. What's the benefit, right? Well, if you have the data, you have the analytics, you have the answers that you need, you can be proactive. How many people are reactive? I had a customer describe to me one day the tension between IT and security. This is not mine. So don't hate me, depending on which side you're on. The analogy was, you've got IT and security sitting in a boat. Security's bailing water as quickly as possible. 10,000 holes in the boat, gotta bail it. While the IT person is just drilling holes, more holes. And I was like, that seems kind of rude. The security person is like, the IT guys care about closing tickets and granting access and not having the VP of whatever team or their boss's boss yell at them. They're in charge with enabling the business so the business can be efficient. If they don't have the data and they can't make the right choice, they've got to do essentially what the customer wants, right? So it's not necessarily their fault, right? Well, there's better ways to do this, right? So I just talked about a scenario where it was both not reactive but proactive, but it also leads to efficacy. I mentioned earlier that the maturity scale of 1 to 5, I've only found 2 companies that were 5. I've seen companies where somebody hasn't used a piece of software for 30 days, they lose access, they reclaim that license. They can do Sarbanes-Oxley, SOX, that once a month type of audit that everybody has to go through. It's not that big a deal to them. They can do the diff, they can hand the report in, minimal effort, right? This all leads, obviously, and this was the security person's concern, to stronger security. If you know what you have, you know how it's locked down, you know it's being used, you know the answers to the questions that the auditor has, that the pen tester has, that everybody else has, then you're gonna have a better security posture. It's also gonna boost productivity. This is where the business cares. I need my people to have access in a timely fashion. That would be kind of the high level one. And then we're back to the identity data hygiene, huge benefit, answers, and the identity data fabric, an underlying layer helping support all of these benefits. So let's jump into some data-driven identity solutions. So walk through some examples that I've seen over the last few years. When I was working with my marketing team on this slide deck, I think this was probably initially like 3 slides. It probably had 9 different examples. And it was fun to put together just because you realize as you're bringing this knowledge that these things are known, these things are just being used in a different part of the business, over to the identity and the security side, you're just helping out a different team. And the example number 1 is essentially anomalous access, right? Now, anomalous is not typically helpful. Anomaly based off of what? Based off of who? What they knew was because they had the analytics and they had the usage information, they were able to leverage the analytics in order to essentially create access patterns. The example I'll use, and it's not necessarily risk-based, but you could probably overlay this, was a company that was migrating from Lucidchart over to Figma, right? There's a birthright from a provisioning perspective when the company comes in. When do you update that? Obviously, when everybody's migrated over. How are you going to tell that? Well, nobody's going to be using the previous Lucidchart version. There's cost associated with that, obviously. But let's say that there's business intelligence inside of there. Let's say that there's other types of information inside of there. Proprietary information. All of these things are important to the business, and being able to generate this type of information and have access to it is important. The next one, automating different identity processes. And I would imagine to some degree, most of you probably have like automated provisioning to a certain degree for the applications that support it. And you probably have some deprovisioning if the vendor supports it, which obviously they all don't. So if you have high confidence, if you have usage, is another one, usage comes in. The number of times I see companies where somebody's terminated, but their session hasn't been expired, and they're still able to access Google Docs or O365. Happens all the time. And then the last one, I've only seen one company actually do this, and it was a company where IT and security sat inside the production engineering team, and they had access to the data engineering team, the data science team, and actually were able to implement a data fabric inside of there. All right, so as I'm getting inside of here, I'm getting close on time. Let's kind of do a wrap up here. In a perfect world, and I think Gartner has an article out there about this, You would just walk over to your CTO and your data engineering team and say, hey guys, I talked to this crazy dude at the conference last week. He said I should talk to you. This is what Gartner tells you to do too. That's going to be problematic because that data engineering team and that business and that CTO are servicing the business. They have a long list of things. So in a perfect world, they would prioritize that. If you have that relationship with that team, by all means, go do it. That's an expertise and a skill set you don't have and that you need inside of identity, and they know how to solve your problems. They don't care about what the data is. They're pretty much data agnostic. They jump into all sorts of data sets all the time where they don't know what the data is, but they can still help people. In the real world, though, that's not going to happen very often. And so your options then are to hire data engineers, which is challenging, or you could expect more for your vendors. I think that's probably one of the punchlines on this is in the future, some of the things I've talked about here are the biggest gaps you have inside of identity. Yes, there are identity things, segregation of duties, non-human identity. There's a long list. But if you don't have access to the data, if you don't understand it, you can't ask questions of it, you're going to be hurting. So on the business side, we have these proven techniques. We have these proven tools. Don't reinvent the wheel. Another one is, I'm going to keep saying it. You still might not like the term. I'm not even sure I actually like the term. Gartner's going to start going heavy on this one if you guys don't know. So you're going to be hearing a lot about this term in the future. But then there's also next-gen capabilities. I think the hype of LLMs is pretty much gone, but there are these things called generative agents that are going to be really powerful. That's another thing you might want to look towards in the future. It is something that can actually help with a lot of the things that we've talked about here. And then obviously we've heard about the co-pilots. It's not going to solve, it's not going to replace people like a lot of people have kind of predicted. But I have fed identity information into these types of things in order to be able to ask it questions. It does summarization real well. Its ability essentially to be like an avatar or an angel sitting on your shoulder pointing things out to you because it can understand the data, because it does all these things that I was talking about. Look for these types of things as well. And so then in conclusion, identity challenges, complex, obviously. Collaboration, if you can. Know your maturity level, know what you can do, know what you can't do. And then lastly, the identity data fabric is going to be practical. You're probably not doing it right now. I'd almost guarantee nobody inside of here is probably doing it right now. But definitely partner with data experts and expect more from your vendors in the future. So with that, I'll take questions if there are any.
So this session is almost everything you cover is very near and dear to what I'm up to right now, which is capturing data from enterprise identity systems and doing real-time analytics on it to answer questions. Now, most of the questions are in the security space, but there are a lot of interesting problems in this area, and I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about, I've got so many questions here. Why is Gartner calling this out as, identity fabric and identity pipelines as something that enterprises need to deal with?
I love this question. So I spent 20 years on the customer side, right? I'm on the vendor side for 8 years now. I have no love or love lost for Gartner. I've actually really have enjoyed working with their identity team, and I couldn't figure out why, because usually they're not fun. The entire identity team at Gartner right now, or a majority of them, they're former customers. They understand the problems. And some of them, like one of the ones I actually talked about, he worked for, we'll call them one of the larger banks in America, is now a Gartner analyst. Mm-hmm. He's kind of retired as a Gartner analyst. But the people who understand these problems, some of the people that actually have been able to get the budget to hire the types of people and build the types of technologies on their own are now at Gartner and they're talking about it. And so what you're then seeing also from other parts of Gartner is they have data expertise there. They also cater to the business side as well. And now they're starting to cross-pollinate internally as well. So while it's very buzzwordy, we know Gartner is nothing but acronyms and buzzwords, there's a lot of substance to it, and I can speak to it. Yes, I'm on the vendor side right now, but I've been doing this for most of my career. I really like being identity right now because the work I've been doing for most of my career is highly relevant to the identity world. So it's kind of become a passion of mine, and the customers, the former customers at Gartner, they're pretty passionate about it too. So that's why you're starting to see that change. If you go to Gartner World, I think in December next month, you'll probably be hearing quite a bit about some of the things I talked about.
Okay, and what is Gartner proposing that enterprises do with a identity data pipeline or an identity data mesh?
That's a harder question to answer. So Gartner's about spaces, Gartner's about acronyms. For this space, they actually don't have an acronym. They don't even know what to call it, right? There's not like an existing space that this is called. Last year they came up with something called VIA, Visibility, Intelligence, and Action. And it had inside of it a whole bunch of data engineering type things. It was also the one that was telling you to go talk to your internal data engineering team. But Gartner is even starting to fill these things out. So they have around PEG and they have around whole. So they're not trying to jam something inside of it. The challenge, and it's been our challenge too, as we've gone and talked to customers, is I can't come and talk data engineering to customers. They don't understand it. And so you have to come at it from a problem and solution point of view, right? You have the Rob Roberto problem, where inside of HR, you're Roberto, inside of Active Directory, you're Rob, because I could put in a ticket, or I could get into Slack channel and say, hey, you know what, I don't want to be Roberto, I want to be known as Rob. And you just created a data hygiene issue, right? I didn't necessarily have to talk about the data engineering aspect and the cleansing of the data and the data hygiene. It was, you have this problem, that's how you solve it. Gartner's struggling with this right now. And so they're trying to figure it out. You know, we're trying to figure, there's different companies out there trying to figure it out right now. Almost a new vernacular. All the terms we used in the data engineering world don't mean anything to the IT and the security world. So that's something that we'll have to overcome.
Other? Yeah.
So this is not going to be deeply technical, but I just was wondering if you drill down on the statement you had there for expecting more from vendors. Like, can you specify a little bit more on what that should mean?
Yeah, so as a former customer, I don't do product demos, but I am a vendor. And so I'm in a space that's actually doing this. And there's 6, 7 other companies doing it. All of them are super early stage companies. Some of them have backgrounds like mine and my teams. Some of them are starting to figure it out. But when you go out and you listen to customer problems and you figure out that it's a data problem and it's a solvable data problem, you're going to start to see companies that are coming out and offering solutions and capabilities like I talked about today.
Okay, I've got one more question, and I think we'll have to wrap it up after that. When you look at an identity platform, it generally includes identity information like a directory of some sort, authentication, audit, and authorization. And in a lot of ways, authorization is the whole point, right? The rest of it is kind of meaningless unless you're doing authorization based on identity data. The problem is that the authorization systems aren't externalized from the applications. Every application has its own scheme for granting rights and roles and everything else. So have you thought about how we end up rationalizing the identity pipeline and the identity data fabric where every application has its own data model for authorization?
Yeah, this goes back to the days when I'm a big, I hate RBAC. I'm more of a attribute-based type of dude.
Yep. Long live XACML.
Yeah. So to your point, I'll give you a few examples. One of the things you have to do is you have to go in and you kind of got to get a lay of the land, right? So I'll use, we're doing a lot with Intro right now. A lot of people have it. A lot of people do weird things with it, like create custom roles, right? A bank I worked with has over 22 million groups, right? And one of the things that causes this chaos is, and I would lump this in kind of like the data hygiene problem, is understanding where there's duplicates, understanding where there's overlap in order to remove complexity and remove all of this extra stuff that's out there that nobody knows why it's there and somebody created by accident, or we went through an M&A, or kind of whatever the kind of case may be. But one of the ways to help start solving it is to first get access to it, understand you have to develop subject matter expert for the endpoint too, right? I think most customers, when it comes to something like an IGA, what they struggle with is not like necessarily the commercial branding applications, it's all the internal housed applications, right? And you better be an SQL expert then. Because if you're not, those things run on SQL, and you're not going to be able to help solve that. And you have to also understand what their model is. Is it going to be authenticated locally? Is it authenticated through Active Directory? All these different types of things. All of that is well documented. And all of you understand that. And if you got into a system, you would be able to know, like, why does this person have a local account that's against policy? They shouldn't have that account there. Nobody should be logging in locally. Everybody should, because we want logging, we want all this other type of stuff. What you need is a product that actually interfaces it from a data perspective and pulls that type of information in. And so if I can go into something like an intra, I know what all the default roles are. You created some new ones. There's probably a reason why, but majority of them are just duplicative. We wanted to create one for the finance team. We wanted to create one for the marketing team, even though they have all the same roles, right? Duplicative types of things. And so for us, it's more of what's the easiest problem to solve, and making sure that foundation is as solid as possible, because every problem above that's going to get harder and harder and harder. And if the previous layer isn't rock solid, then you're going to introduce problems in the second layer. You're probably not going to either solve it, or you're probably going to be potentially introducing errors as much as anything. Now, having done this before in many different types of products and platforms, I know it can be done. It won't be perfect. What you then look for, and this is another thing data engineers do really well, is look for the anomalies. Look for when the database was upgraded and a string field is now an array field, right? That's something that we're used to being able to do. So if you understand all these types of things, then kind of address your problem. There's subject matter expertise on that endpoint and how they enact roles or access or whatever. There's what the people are using. There's what it should be. There's how many duplicate roles are there. Once you start to peel the onion, and it's a huge problem. I mean, this is not something that's going to get solved in 6 months. No company, if they tell you like they're just going to be able to start doing all of this inside of the next few months or even a year, like it's a big problem. But that's the systematic approach from like a data engineering perspective that you have to take in order to be able to unravel it.
All right, thanks.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.